Our newscast tonight, the southeast of the nation feels the devastating effects of torrential rains that began on Monday. It destroys buildings, halts subway operations, grounds flights, and take lives. Korea's main opposition party joins an ongoing protest outside the gates of the presidential office of Cheong Wa Dae. They demand more power for victims' families in negotiations over a special bill aimed at uncovering the causes of April's ferry disaster. And U.S. military support in Syria's battle against Islamic State militants is a strong possibility. U.S. President Barack Obama authorizes air surveillance flights over the country. These and more coming up an early edition at 6.
It's 6 in the evening on Tuesday, August 26th, here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us. Korea's rival parties are on a collision course again, with opposition lawmakers boycotting all legislation until the ruling camp accepts its demand regarding a probe into April's ferry disaster.
And that demand being giving the bereaved families more say in setting up the probe, but the ruling party is not budging. Connie Kim has our top story.
Opposition lawmakers have occupied the National Assembly building, blocking all parliamentary proceedings to press their demand that the ruling party let the victims' families take part in setting up an investigation into the ferry sinking. Following the ruling party's rejection one day earlier to hold three-way talks with the families, lawmakers of the New Politics Alliance for Democracy earlier on Tuesday demonstrated outside the presidential office of Cheong Wa Dae, asking President Park Geun-hye to help resolve the deadlock. They joined dozens of members of bereaved families who have been camped out there since Friday.
We will fight against the ruling Saenuri party and the president until they respond to the requests of the victims' families who want to uncover the real causes of the sinking.
The protesters are calling on the ruling party to make yet another concession after the families rejected bipartisan compromise deals twice on the grounds that their voices were not fully reflected in how a probe into the accident will be carried out. The ruling party lashed back at the opposition party, accusing them of abandoning democratic principles and urging them to immediately return to the National Assembly. The Saenuri party said they will not agree on tripartite negotiations, but will seek to talk to the victims' relatives separately. The months-long political deadlock has suspended all legislative proceedings, including bills aimed at revitalizing the economy and ending corruption, as well as an annual parliamentary audit that was scheduled for this Tuesday. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
And while the National Assembly is paralyzed over the ferry investigation, one person biting his nails is Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan. A number of key bills aimed at boosting the nation's economy have been sitting idle on lawmakers' desks, and Choi has urged them to get moving. Our Son Jung-in reports.
Standing alongside key policymakers on Tuesday morning, Deputy Prime Minister Choi Kyung-hwan sounded the alarm about the state of the Korean economy and called out lawmakers for their inability to pass a number of key bills aimed at reviving it.
The pulse of our economy is weakening. If those bills related to the livelihoods of the people do not pass during this session, and if we fail to stoke the embers of economic recovery, the economy could go off the tracks and we would face difficulties in turning it around.
While Choi said he understands the importance of the so-called Seoul ferry bill, he also said that 9 economic bills which have been labeled as urgent need to be passed as soon as possible. Choi also pointed out that at least 30 other pending bills need attention as well, all intended to stabilize people's livelihoods. The finance minister asked that lawmakers show leadership moving forward. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
In the meantime, the nation's financial sector is about to get a facelift with hopes of boosting President Park Geun-hye's creative economy drive. The plan is to give startups and small to mid-sized firms better access to funds by easing the government's grip over financial institutions. Our Chae Yu-sun has the details.
As of June of this year, 73% of corporate loans were made to small and mid-sized businesses, a 10 percentage point drop from the end of 2009. The financial sector, specifically those employed by financial institutions, are often reluctant to take a risk with startups and SMEs as they face sanctions if the borrower becomes insolvent. Reporting to President Park Geun-hye at our economic advisors meeting Tuesday, the state-run Financial Services Commission said it would lift more than 90% of such sanctions. That means, in the case of insolvency, employees will not be deprived of a promotion or bonuses so long as there are no procedural failures. The financial regulator will instead strengthen sanctions on the institutions. To further encourage financial support for the president's envisioned creative economy, which aims to converge ICT, culture, and other areas, the FSC talked about offering incentives to banks that support innovation and technology-based firms. The government also plans to set up a technology-valued investment fund totaling $295 million that will be used as venture capital and more than double another fund that buys a tech firm's intellectual property or shares to guarantee a return on its investments. President Park urged authorities to ensure enough low-interest loans are made available for businesses whose creativity and innovative technology are appreciated. Many financial insiders welcomed the government's sanction reforms, but there were some concerned about how assessing the bank's innovation for incentives could limit their autonomy and push them toward insolvency. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
And Korean households may need some help as well as they sink deeper and deeper into debt. New provisional data released by the Bank of Korea shows that the amount of credit purchases and loans by households hit a fresh high in the second quarter to slightly over $1 trillion. The amount of household credit increased by 6% on year, surpassing the near 4% increase of last year's nominal gross domestic product. When that happens, it means a heavier burden is placed on households when they pay off their mortgage loans, which in turn could worsen already sluggish domestic consumption. Korea's household debt has risen for 5 straight quarters. Moving on to a different topic, Korea's corporate culture is uniquely influenced by Confucianism, not unlike Korean society itself. Employees are used to taking orders. Questioning orders or expressing bold new ideas is more often than not frowned upon. But IT companies here are apparently taking steps to change that culture to promote creativity. Our Yurian has more.
Korean IT companies are creating a more casual work environment to promote creativity. Daum Communications, which is set to merge with Korea's largest messenger application company, Kakao Corporation, says it will have its 1,600 workers refer to each other with English names by October. It's intended to eliminate the hierarchy that's standard in Korean culture, where employees are socially obligated to address each other by their position and seniority instead of by their first names like in the West. Daum believes the change will allow young staffers to more freely express themselves and enhance communication and cooperation in the process. Naver Corporation took a step in the same direction recently when it said that its employees will stop referring to each other by their titles to create a less formal work environment. Could the seemingly minor changes bring about real changes to Korea's innovation potential? A recent innovation index ranked Korea 16th out of 77 countries, higher than Japan or China. But when it came to the so-called tolerance index, which measures how much a society tolerates different values and thoughts, Korea was ranked near the bottom at 62.
If we look at our Confucianist culture, we were taught that there is a right answer to everything. We're never taught to look for new answers. To foster creativity, we need to learn that there isn't just one correct answer to everything, and understand there could be multiple answers.
With Korea's rigid and hierarchical corporate culture being blamed for stifling creativity, the IT companies are trying to break it down, one English name at a time. Yurian, Arirang News.
On a more somber note, record downpours leading up to Mondays took lives and dealt heavy blows in a variety of levels in a variety of fields in Korea's southeastern Gyeongsang-namdo province. For this report, we have our Connie Lee.
In Changwon, Southeast Korea, a city bus is swept away in flash floods caused by heavy rain. Caught in the fast-moving currents, the bus tips onto its side, and in an instant, it disappears, submerged under the rushing water. At least one person was killed in this incident. This is just one of the unfortunate effects of the record rain that drenched southeastern Korea on Monday. Measuring up to 130 millimeters per hour, the torrential rains hit Korea's port city of Busan and nearby regions in Gyeongsang-namdo province, causing landslides, flooding cars and houses, and halting rail services and flights in and out of Kimhae Airport. Officials from the National Emergency Management say at least 13 people have been killed or have gone missing. On Tuesday morning, police continued the search for the missing, with fears that the bodies could have been swept into the nearby ocean. For those confirmed dead, some drowned inside their cars that were stuck in a flooded underground road, while others were swept away by floodwaters. A 65-kilowatt nuclear power plant was also manually shut down for the first time after rain began to seep into the facility. Officials say the Kori plant will resume operations after inspections deem it safe. Within 3 hours, more than 240 millimeters of rain fell in Changwon, Busan, and other surrounding cities. Weather officials say showers are expected this week in central and eastern parts of Korea, with the monsoon season lingering until mid-September. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Face a one-day entry ban. 77.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Laah Hyun-kyung and Daniel Choy.
Arirang News.
Arirang News. Arirang News. On Early Edition at 6.
South Korea and the U.S. are in the middle of their annual joint military drills, and North Korea is, of course, not happy about it. The regime's deputy ambassador to the UN says Pyongyang might consider unleashing a powerful counterstrike. Shin Se-min has more.
North Korea's deputy ambassador to the UN, Lee Tong-il, says Pyongyang is ready to enhance its countermeasures to the joint military drills between Seoul and Washington.
The DPRK is close to the use of nuclear weapons. They are to take nuclear preemptive strike with all different means of power, including nuclear weapons.
The North Korean envoy also expressed his frustration with the UN Security Council after it failed to acknowledge Pyongyang's request for an emergency meeting in response to the South Korea-US drills. The ambassador said the UN's inaction sends the wrong message to the international community, and the Security Council is encouraging the US to continue its provocative and dangerous joint military exercises against the North. The North Korean official also showed a slightly softer side.
In all these proposals are reflected the principled position of the DPRK on easing of the tension and bringing the national unity.
North Korea has been heavily critical of the joint South Korea-US exercises since they kicked off on August 18th. Earlier this month, Lee said the drills, which mobilized tens of thousands of South Korean and US troops, were the root cause of the prolonged tension on the Korean peninsula. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
But there is at least one area where the two Koreas are showing signs of cooperation. That's the Asian Games set to take place in Incheon. North Korea had said it would send 273-member delegation to the event, and today, Seoul and Pyongyang started ironing out the details of how the two sides will accommodate each other's needs during the Games. South Korea's Unification Ministry says it sent a two-page letter to North Korea through the Truth Village of Panmunjom. A ministry official says the letter did not contain a direct offer to provide financial support for the North Korean athletes, but added that Seoul will give full support in making sure the athletes don't experience any inconveniences during their time here.
Shifting our focus to outside of Korea, U.S. President Barack Obama has approved air surveillance of Islamic State militants in Syria. This comes after the Syrian government said it was ready to cooperate with the U.S. on countering the threat. Our Kwon So-hwa has this story.
U.S. military action against Islamic State militants in Syria is a possibility in the near future, as President Barack Obama has authorized surveillance flights over militant targets in Syria. A senior U.S. official says Obama made the decision over the weekend, and according to defense officials on Monday, the Pentagon was preparing to dispatch manned and unmanned aircraft, including drones and spy planes. Earlier, Syria's foreign minister said his country welcomes any international help, including from the U.S., in fighting Islamic State militants.
We are ready to cooperate and coordinate with regional countries and the international community in fighting terrorism following the resolutions of the Security Council. We welcome everybody.
The offer was not unconditional, though. Mualim warned that any U.S. airstrikes must be coordinated with Damascus and that anything else would be considered an aggression. While the surveillance flights are for gathering intelligence on the Islamic State group, they could become precursors for an expansion of airstrikes in Syria, in addition to those that began in Iraq earlier this month. Also on Monday, the UN condemned crimes committed by IS militants in Iraq.
Such cold-blooded, systematic and intentional killing of civilians, after singling them out for their religious affiliation, may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity.
The UN said there was substantial evidence of widespread rights violations such as targeted killings, abductions, sexual abuse, slavery, and the besieging of specific communities. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
In other stories, the presidents of Ukraine and Russia have met just once in the past few months amid the military conflicts in eastern Ukraine. With both leaders in Belarus to participate in a summit, the world is wondering whether they'll sit down for face-to-face talks and whether it would even make a difference if they do. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin are set to sit down at the same table for talks this Tuesday. The leaders will meet in Minsk, Belarus, alongside representatives from the European Union during a summit of the Russian-led customs union. It's uncertain whether the two leaders will hold bilateral talks. The two briefly met in June. Since then, Ukrainian forces have gained the upper hand against pro-Russian rebels fighting for control over an area in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine said Monday its security services had captured 10 Russian servicemen in the area and also clashed with 10 tanks and 2 armored personal carriers from Russia. Ukraine has accused Moscow of sending its troops into the country, a claim the Kremlin denies. Over 2,000 people have died in fighting since Russia annexed Crimea in March. In a separate development, Poroshenko dissolved parliament on Monday and announced elections for October 26th. The president said that many of the current MPs were supporters of ousted President Viktor Yanukovych and added that the majority of Ukrainians want a new parliament. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Well, in Rwanda, the UN World Food Program is carrying out a special project called the Semaul Zero Hunger Communities. It's a concept modeled after Korea's Semaul movement in the 1970s, and I believe you were kept busy because of this.
Yeah, that's right. The head director of the UNWFP's office in Rwanda was here earlier, and I had a chance to talk to him. I started by asking more about the Semaul Zero Hunger Communities project. Take a look.
Well, it's an exciting project. It's a new project that started 2.5 years ago with the support of KOICA and the government of Korea. So it's a project that looks at helping very poor communities in Rwanda fight poverty, fight hunger, and try to address their problem of food insecurity.
And the word Semaul, I'm sure if for the people in Korea, they're used to the word Semaul, but people in Rwanda are probably not.
They're not. They're familiar with the type of of community work we used to do before with them at World Food Program. But recently we've come in partnership with KOICA and with the government of Korea in merging the spirit of Samulundong to what we used to do. And it's yielding some very impressive benefits up to now for these very poor communities.
So what are some of the examples of those achievements so far?
Rwanda, for example, is a very hilly country, a bit like Korea is. And in areas where they didn't use to produce anything out of them because of the terrain was too hilly, we managed to build these radical terraces. And we increased by basically 100% agricultural yields on these areas. So now these poor families who used to produce just enough to feed themselves, now they manage to meet their own needs, but in addition to that, they're able to sell their surpluses on the market. So for the first time, they have some cash income. So the quality of their lifestyle has increased dramatically. So that's just one component. We're building different type of infrastructure assets in the community to look at really helping them, pulling themselves out of poverty.
What kind of support then do you expect from South Korea?
Well, first of all, it was the model per se, Samulundong. So that's a model that has proven itself obviously here in Korea in the 70s and 80s. And because of its universal values, principles, and concept, this can be exportable to the developing world. So we've realized this at the World Food Program, and now we're using Samulundong in 4 countries, among them Rwanda. So it's a kind of synergy of like minds where KOICA's success stories are being merged with WFP's experience in the field, and it's proving to be quite successful up to now.
But there must have been some challenges, though. I mean, 새마을운동 is from Korea, and the culture of Korea is different from that in Rwanda.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, you look at the context of Korea in the 1970s, where the country was still quite poor.
Struggling.
And then you can draw these parallels with what you can see in the developing world and in Africa and in Rwanda. So you can draw these parallels between level of developments. But like I said earlier, you do have these kind of universal principles that can be used even in Africa. For example, you know, at the time we were talking about the importance of collaboration, the importance of being quite diligent in the management of these projects, the importance of becoming self-reliant and self-help. These are still values today which are quite applicable to contexts like in Rwanda. And by applying them, now we're seeing results. So yes, it needs to be obviously adapted to the national context, but if you're smart about contextualizing your program and your approach and involving the communities from the very onset, it works.
Well, how can ordinary or general public show support in supporting and funding the program?
I think there's ways of supporting. It's a good question. Normally, WFP works mainly with government in terms of its funding. We do also do private fundraising with companies. But there are also opportunities if you go on the WFP website for individual to contribute and support.
Well, we have a lot of rain, and more rain. Hopefully, this trend will change. Let's turn to our Michelle Park for the latest updates. Michelle?
Good evening. It's currently raining heavily in the eastern coastal regions at a rate of some 10 millimeters per hour. And the southern regions aren't being spared either, and more heavy rain is in the forecast there, and it's expected to come down at a rate of 20 millimeters per hour. As we move further into the evening, 40 millimeters of rain is expected all across the nation, except for the surrounding regions of Gyeongsangnam-do province, where 60 millimeters are expected. And other than some light drizzles in some regions early tomorrow morning, we are expecting a dry day nationwide tomorrow with the partly cloudy skies and temperatures ranging very similar to today. Now going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will top out the Wednesday morning at 21 before reaching up to 30 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will top out at 28 and 26 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 28, while Dokdo hits 22, while Mount Kumgang tops at 24. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for that, Michelle. That's all we have for you at this hour. Thank you for staying with us. If you're watching from different time zones, have a wonderful day. This has been Daniel Choy.
And I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. To our viewers in Korea, have a great rest of the evening. Our next newscast is at 8 p.m. Korea time, but Daniel and I will be back tomorrow.